Getting the border fully open and trade and business flowing again is the number one priority of many businesses here in the North Country who took part in the Chamber's annual survey that asked them the biggest challenges they're facing in 2022, how confident they are about their business and the economy, and what issues they'd like lawmakers in Albany and Washington to prioritize for the year. As far as federal issues, normalizing traffic at the border was tops. The rising cost of inflation and the impact that's having on businesses was a close second, with nearly 80% of the businesses that responded saying inflation is negatively impacting their business. Many say the supply challenges are also hurting business.
The border, still a very strong concern. We want to see it start to transition between now and summer to something that approaches normalcy. So our Canadian friends are back here again, and we're able to go up there again. Supply chains, they expressed concerns about that actually impacting businesses here on the ground. That if those don't get fixed, if those get worse, you could see that drain optimism in the coming months.
The survey also asked businesses to identify the top state issues. Closing broadband and cell phone service gaps was number one. Avoiding new pandemic mandates was second. And the survey also delves into other issues, like staff shortages.
We may be doing all right, but we're losing business because we don't have enough staff. You can see restaurants all over town are closing on days that they used to be open, or limiting their hours to less than they used to, giving up their lunchtime service or whatever, because they don't have enough staffing. The mall has reduced its hours because its tenants don't have enough staffing. So we're seeing that this is a real impact. It's not just where we were a couple of years ago. Very tight workforce situation. Gee, it's getting really hard. Now it's really hard, and it's really impacting us directly. We're unable to sustain our business at the level that we could and be able to generate more economic activity and more business because we don't have enough people.
Still, more than 70% of the businesses surveyed expect business to go up this year, while just shy of 20% expect business to be steady. And Gary Douglas with the North Country Chamber of Commerce joins us. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Tom. Great to do this at least once a year.
Yeah, every single year. As we just heard, businesses are optimistic that we're going to get through this pandemic and that things will get back to normal. The border's open, but the hope is eventually Canadians and Americans are going to be able to cross the border
We have to get it back to normalcy.
That's it, without having to have a COVID test. Quebec's been in lockdown again in recent weeks, so it's been hard, not impossible for Americans to get into Canada, get into Quebec, and get to Montreal. But we're seeing the impact here. Canadians needing a COVID test to get back home. Are they just not coming down to the North Country now?
Yeah, we had that 3-week window in December when Canada withdrew the test requirement for up to 72 hours. Those short-term trips, day or two trip by a Canadian down here, didn't need the test. They then turned around with the variant that came in and the rise. They turned around, they pulled that back, and in fact made it a little worse, because at least before they had done that in December, a Canadian could come down and if they still had to take a test, but they could take that test before they left and use that result within 72 hours on return. Now if they come down, the test has to be a test given in the U.S., which just makes it more logistically problematic to work that into a day trip. It means you really can't do a day trip. And go someplace, get a test here and get the result, know what the result's going to be and go back. So it really is more onerous. So if anything, it kind of screwed it down a little further in terms of short-term tests. We're back to what I've called purposeful travel. Business travelers will do what they have to do, and we're finding that they're doing it. Somebody from Nova Bus will come down to Plattsburgh. A long time they didn't feel they could. Now they can. They'll take the tests. The company will cover that cost. Somebody really needs to visit their family, well, they'll go through what they need to go through and they'll do that. But not casual or recreational travel in either direction. It just is too daunting.
Right from the start of the pandemic, what was deemed essential traffic, healthcare workers, truckers delivering goods and supplies, were allowed to cross the border. They didn't have to have a test. They didn't have to be fully...
We never saw for a year and a half a single instance of any interference with essential travelers.
And now, with these new rules put in place a couple of weeks ago, essential workers need to be fully vaccinated to cross the border. Healthcare workers have to be to work in New York, so no real disruption there. But truckers. That's where the issue is.
Yeah, we know there's an impact out there. Supply chains are so layered and complex, you can't get company A to say that, well, because there's fewer truckers driving across the border, that has caused this effect on my company. We're not able to see that yet. We're hoping and expecting that some national analysts, or on a binational basis, will be able to kind of glean through some research what the impacts are. We know there are impacts. One of the challenges in defining the impacts is that the supply chain system was so dysfunctional to begin with. Everybody was complaining about delays and stuff not arriving, and uncertainty about timelines and shortages of goods in our manufacturing sector and agriculture and everything, that to ferret in a couple of weeks, to ferret out what additional impact there is, we haven't seen yet. But there's no question there is.
The overwhelming majority of truckers are vaccinated. We're talking a small percentage.
Yeah, I think the estimates I saw were that Canadian truck drivers were about 85% vaccinated. Still 15% of truck drivers nationally in Canada is a substantial number, especially when you then realize that there was such a shortage to begin with. So you take 15% out of a situation where there's no surplus, there's no drivers to replace those drivers, that's a significant impact.
We've seen the protests this week in Ottawa. Is this short-sighted on the part of both governments to require the truckers to be vaccinated? It seemed to be working effectively during the pandemic up to this point.
I spent 14 years working in the U.S. Congress, and so I can tell you that one of the most troubling things that happens in any issue is when you get to that point where elected officials start saying, we have to do something. And then that something becomes low-hanging fruit, things that they can show that they're being tough and they're taking action, but they often aren't the right things or things that are actually going to move the needle at all. And this was an example, particularly on Canada's part, to apply the mandate on truckers who for more than a year and a half have been going back and forth with no incident because of the very limited interaction they have anyways. It just lets them look tough. It's not going to move the needle or make anybody really safer in the case of these truckers. If that was the case, then why didn't they do it a year and a half ago? Why didn't they do it a year ago or 6 months ago? Because it wasn't a problem. So it's a political stunt, and it's unfortunate. It's going to have some negative effect. We want to stay focused on getting the conversation back as soon as possible in both countries to say, can we please get back to something that is very close to normal by summer? Let's set that as a goal. It ought to be achievable, barring something really catastrophic or unforeseen. How are we going to move, at what pace, and what are the metrics? Once again, we're back to the days of crickets in both countries because it's just not on the radar scope of political will. Okay, I get that. We're not going to change particularly the Canadian equation anytime soon. The political will evaporated for a time. But we got to still keep talking about it, because otherwise we'll just reinforce the notion that, well, look at that, nobody's really, we pull back and nobody's really unhappy about it. Well, we are unhappy about it, and we still need to see metrics and a plan for a way forward.
And for things to get back to normal, both countries really need to be on the same page.
Yeah, and the U.S. is basically in a more advanced position than Canada is, because we're allowing Canadians in as long as you're fully vaccinated. There's no test requirements. Mm-hmm. So it's Canada that's kind of the more rigorous player here, who's out of sync with us in terms of going beyond fully vaccinated to requiring tests within 72 hours.
And as we saw from the survey this year, that is the number one issue for businesses.
Their
biggest concern is getting the border back open, getting things back to normal.
Far and away. We're in the Quebec business. We often say that. That's the truth of our area. When you're in the Quebec business and you can't get there and they can't get here, that's having an impact.
So your survey of about 700 businesses that responded found optimism that we can rebound from COVID, but they did raise some red flags, some concerns they want you folks at the Chamber to pass on to lawmakers. Inflation is a big one.
Yes.
Taking steps to deal with the sudden and dramatic rise and jump in inflation in the past year. Businesses are feeling it.
78% said that a rising inflation is directly impacting their business. So there's a larger number, 90-some%, who said something more should be done about it. But then we asked, is this really affecting your day-to-day business? And 78% said yes. So this is really having an impact on the cost of their goods. We said the same thing about supply chains, by the way. Again, an overwhelming number said we need to do more about national and international supply chains and the problems that are being experienced. But a full 71% said that supply chain problems are impacting their day-to-day business.
Right now.
contractors with building materials, manufacturers with suppliers or parts they need for their operation that aren't coming as routinely as they did. We know of restaurants, things aren't on the menu because they couldn't get something, it didn't get delivered. It's happening all up and down in terms of the access to the things to do business day to day.
And we know the restaurants are scaling back, in some cases, their hours, their days that they're open, and labor shortage is another huge issue.
Well, that's the other thing. We asked and we expected there'd be a very strong response about the labor shortage. By the way, for December in Clinton County, it was 2.7% unemployment. I've been here 30 years. I never thought I'd see something in the twos. I didn't know it was possible to be in the twos. But we're in the twos. We've been in the threes occasionally in the past during real, robust economic times, but we're down to 2.7% unemployment in Clinton County. So we would expect a lot of concern about that. 60% indicated that staffing shortages are directly limiting their business, causing them to have fewer hours, to close certain days, to reduce their production. Again, whatever kind of business it is, those staffing shortages are causing a loss of business. They're saying they expect business to be up this year. They're feeling good overall about business, but they're providing us with warning signs. They're saying there actually is more business we're leaving on the table, more business we're not doing that we should and could be doing because we don't have enough people to do it.
So when they ask you to go talk to state lawmakers, what do you suggest to them? What can be done to help with the labor shortage?
On the workforce side, one of the things that a lot of attention is being keyed on, and it started to be pre-pandemic, and then the pandemic really accented it. And there now is a real national consensus, particularly in the business community nationally, that this country, this state, need to do a lot more in the child care area. We have to make it possible for people to work at our businesses and our companies. So sufficient child care, but also affordable child care. And so that was strongly expressed in the survey. We're seeing some response in Washington. We're seeing some response in Albany. We're going to keep talking about it. I think we'll see more. I think we're collectively with colleagues across the country starting to move that needle. Is there something in kind of the social service realm that this country should be doing more of that would actually be economically important to do is childcare.
And we talk about the labor shortage. You pointed out at your news conference the other day, that's why SkyWest is pulling out of Plattsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just, your restaurant you like to go to isn't open on Sundays and Mondays anymore because they don't have enough staff. We're seeing a loss of air service. Very strong market, incredible success with United Express, but they can't staff the planes. And we're seeing that across the whole air system nationally.
So the county and the airport will look for a new carrier to come in. Flights probably to a major hub, Boston, Philadelphia, maybe back to Washington again. With the airline industry the way it is, though, during the pandemic right now, is that going to be a challenge to find an airline?
It is going to be a challenge. There are discussions underway, which I can't get into, but the county is in discussions. There is at least one possible candidate of interest. We can't fall back to where we were with puddle hoppers, 6-seaters going somewhere. That's just not appropriate for a major airport like ours. So hopefully we can get something that is similar in type to what we're losing, because we showed that this airport can support that.
So as you head to Washington to meet with the federal leaders, as you head to Albany to meet with Governor Hochul and legislative leaders at the Capitol, along with the concerns you're taking from the businesses, what else are your priorities when you talk to them? What's at the top of your list?
Well, in Washington, it still is border. Let's get back to the conversation. Let's press our Canadian friends. In New York, there's a lot more action to be had in Albany this year.
We saw in the survey, broadband is number one.
Broadband is number one, and two things have happened. The infrastructure bill that Congress passed last fall with a lot of support from Senators Schumer and Gillibrand, in particular on the broadband front, has a huge amount of funding for the first time on the federal level, general funding and investment in broadband. That is going to be supplemented by Governor Hochul's proposed budget with hundreds of millions of dollars of additional and state investment that's going to once again put more than $1 billion on the table to get back out there and close the remaining gaps.
Garry Douglas, as always, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.